of leprosy. But if the priest examines the scaly sore, and indeed it does not appear deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the scale 7 days, again to observe him. And on the 7th day the priest shall examine the sore, and indeed if the scale has not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and the scale does not appear deeper than the skin, he shall shave himself, but the scale he shall not shave. And the priest shall isolate the one who has the scale another 7 days. And on the 7th day the priest shall examine the scale, and if the scale has not spread over the skin, and does not appear deeper than the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. Notice that this is, whenever they're pronounced clean, the next step is wash everything that this could have spread to before you get back into the public. But if the scale should at all spread over the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall examine him. Indeed, if the scale is spread over the skin, the priest need not seek for yellow hair. He is unclean. But if the scale appears to be at a standstill, and there is black hair growing up in it, the scale has healed, he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. The priests were like physicians. When a physician finds somebody with coronavirus, they can isolate and put them in a thing and say, you can't go anywhere. You are quarantined. This is what we call quarantine. When like what they did with the cruise ships, the cruise lines. They quarantined everybody on the boat and weren't going to let them go until they had figured out who was sick, who could spread it, who wouldn't. The priests were responsible for that duty. Today we have the doctors for that. If a man or a woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, specifically white bright spots, then the priest shall look, and indeed if the bright spots on the skin of the body are dull white, it is a white spot that grows on the skin, he is clean. They weren't just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Oh, he's got a white spot, he's unclean. No, there was full-on examinations, quarantine, re-examinations, quarantine, re-examination. Do you think that they could have ever thought of this on their own? This is the perfect remedy for stopping a spread of some contagion. Nobody back then had this idea. If you don't believe that God gave it to them 3,000 years ago, you just think they thought of it. I'm going to contend, if you're a non-believer and think that they just dreamed this up, your argument is not sound. My argument sound that 3,000 years ago, God, who knew the beginning from the end, he knew where all these viruses came from, that he gave this to them, to his people who worshipped him, to keep them from diseases. That's why he gave them a kosher diet. That's why he gave them these techniques for disease under the context of leprosy, knowing that they would apply this to any kind of spreadable disease that they see break out. As for the man who has hair fallen from his head, he is bald, but he is clean. He who has hair has fallen from his forehead, he is bald on his forehead, but he is clean. You are clean, John. And so am I. And if there is on the bald head or bald forehead a reddish white sore, it is leprous breaking out on his bald head or his bald forehead. Then the priest shall examine it. And indeed, if the swelling of the sore is reddish white on his bald head or on his bald forehead, as the appearance of leprosy on the skin of the body, he is a leprous man, he is unclean. The priest shall surely pronounce him unclean. His sore is on his head. Now, the leper on whom the sore is, his clothes shall be torn and his head bare. In other words, they strip him down, they take his clothes off, they shave him completely, because they're going to see if he's going to heal up. And they burn this stuff most likely. And they shall cover his mustache and cry, unclean, unclean. Okay, I'm sorry. What they're saying here is the man, if he's declared unclean by the priest, When he's out in public, he shall cover his beard, shave himself, and tear his clothes, and say, I'm unclean, don't get near me. In fact, literally, they would walk on the other side of the street. Now, how would they know which side of the street to walk on? Depending on the way the wind was blowing. If the wind was blowing from the right to the left, they couldn't be on the right side. They had to be downwind from people. Because they were afraid, because God was saying it could spread by aerosol. Now, leprosy doesn't spread by aerosol. Why is God giving it to them this way? Because this is meant for all contagions. He shall be unclean all the days he has the sore. He shall be unclean. He is unclean, and he shall dwell alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Literally quarantine himself. They say you need to self-quarantine. That's what they're saying to him. You self-quarantine, and if anybody gets near you, you're to say, hey, stand back. I have this issue. It's not healed up yet. Leprosy can heal up. And when it's healed up and no longer contagious, they would be pronounced clean again. God's not heartless to a person who goes through this and just kicks them out for good. He kicks them out until they are healed. Let's see. Verse 47, the law concerning the garments of a leper. Also, if a garment has leprous plague in it, whether it is a woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it is the wrap of a wolf or a linen or wool, whether it's leather or anything made of leather, and if the plague is greenish or reddish in the garment of the leather, whether it is warp or wool or in anything made of leather, it is a leprous plague and shall be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine the plague and isolate that which has the plague 7 days. So, now, why would they just burn it? Well, some of this stuff was expensive. You didn't just, back then, you made clothes, you made these leather items, saddle or whatever it was. You okay, John? The priest shall examine the plague and isolate that which the plague 7 days. And he shall examine the plague on the 7th day. If the plague has spread in the garment, either the warp of the wool or the leather, in anything made of leather, the plague is an active leprosy. It is unclean. He shall therefore burn it, that garment in which is the plague, whether wrap or wolf or wool or linen or anything of leather, for it is an active leprosy, and the garment shall be burned with fire. So if the active leprosy is in something. But if the priest examines it, and indeed the plague has not spread in the garment, either in the wrap or in the wool, or anything of leather, then the priest shall command that they wash the thing in which the plague was, and he shall isolate it another 7 days. Then the priest shall examine the plague after it has been washed, and indeed if the plague has not changed in color, though the plague has not spread, it is unclean, and you shall burn it with fire. It continues eating away, whether the damage is outside or inside the garment. If the priest examines it, and indeed the plague has faded after washing it, then he shall tear it out of the garment, to tear out that piece that was bad, whether out of the warp or the woof or out of the leather. But if it appears again in the garment, either in the wrap, the woof, or the leather, it is spreading plague. You shall burn it with fire, that in which is the plague. And if you wash the garment, either wrap a wolf or whether it's the leather part, if the plague has disappeared from it, then it shall be washed a second time and made clean. This is the law of the leprous plague in the garment of wool or linen, either in the wrap of the wolf or anything made of leather, to pronounce it clean or pronounce it unclean. Verse chapter 14. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, This shall be the law of the leper for the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the leprous is healed in the leper, then the priest shall command to take for him on it For on him is to be cleansed 2 living birds. Now this whole next chapter here is about sacrifices to God once the leper's cleansed. Now we're going to skip over to verse 33. Because the remedies or the sacrifices are rituals to thank God for the cleansing and the healing of the leper. And I encourage you to go back and read this. But because we're going through so many chapters, we're going to focus on the disease here. Now, there's also a law concerning lepers' houses. And this is very interesting. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when you have come into the land of Canaan, which I give you as a possession, and I put the leper's plague in a house in the land of your possession, and he who owns the house comes and tells the priest, saying, it seems to me that there is some plague in the house. Now, again, leprosy is just the context all this is put in, but this is not leprosy in a house. They're not even calling it leprosy right off the bat. They're calling it a plague. Somebody comes to the priest and says, hey, my kids are sick. We got something growing in the house. I contend that this is probably black mold that's causing the family to get sick. Or very well could be some kind of mold, because you're going to see they're going to talk about this and how you scrape it off. This is how we get rid of mold today, by the way. We go in and we cleanse it, we scrape it off the building, we dry it out completely. Watch what happens here. Then the priest shall command that they empty the house before the priest goes in to examine the plague, that all that is in the house may not be made unclean. And afterward the priest shall go in to examine the house, and he shall examine the plague. And indeed, if the plague is on the walls of the house with ingrained streaks. So whatever it is growing into the wood or growing into the plaster. This is mold, all right? Greenish or reddish, which appears to be deep in the wall. Then the priest shall go out of the house to the door of the house and shut up the house for 7 days. They're quarantining a house. And the priest shall come again on the 7th day and look, and indeed if the plague has spread on the walls of the house, then the priest shall command that they take away the stones in which is the plague, and they shall cast them into an unclean place outside the city. So literally they're supposed to disassemble the pieces that have the plague that they haven't gotten rid of and take them outside the house so it doesn't contaminate the rest of the house. And he shall cause the house to be scraped inside and all around. How would anybody make this up 3,000 years ago? It just wouldn't happen. God is saying, when you go into the land that wasn't your land, and you take houses that weren't yours, from the Philistines, and the people you go in to take the land, and you go in and and suddenly your family's getting sick, and you've got this stuff growing on your walls, you go to the priest and you say, hey, we're not feeling too good and we got stuff growing on the walls, there's a plague in here. They have a solution for that. It's the same one we use today, after we all got so smart. Maybe they should have read the Bible a long time ago and started doing this. I mean, before we had so many people ill from mold. And he shall cause the house to be scraped inside and all around, and the dust that they scrape off, they shall pour out in as unclean in a place outside the city. This is incredible because I've done this multiple times. I call in the mold specialists, and the mold specialists literally do this exact same thing. They quarantine off the area. We just did this recently in a house that I was remodeling. We put plastic all around the area, and they scrape the mold off the house. And they scrape it with wire brushes, and they get down to the wood, past